The last time we saw Clark Kent, he found out he had superpowers, and soon after he would find a message from his parents telling him to become the greatest football player of all time. And it definitely looked like Clark was on his way to doing that, as he was dominating at the high school level while also making time to save people when necessary. But after an incredible high school career, Superman would eventually sign with the Kansas Jayhawks, which is where Clark proved that he had potential to become one of the top quarterbacks in the nation. Because even when making time to be Superman, he would still help his team run through the Big 12, eventually being honored as a freshman All-American and earning a ticket to the college football playoffs, where in a game against Michigan, Clark was playing as well as he had all season, at least up until Lex Luthor showed up. And after he put some green liquid in the Gatorade cooler, Clark all of a sudden wasn't feeling so well. So Kansas would end up losing the playoff game and officially put an end to Superman's freshman season. Which brings us to today, where Clark Kent has some decisions to make on his college football future, and he is really thinking about entering the transfer portal. His roster at Kansas is atrocious, and hey, he knows he'll have to put the entire state of Kansas on his back if they want any chance at winning a championship. But if there was one man who was able to do it, it is Superman. So Clark Kent is returning to Kansas for his sophomore season, and he cannot wait to get into the season, man. He was out here working hard with his teammates all throughout camp, and of course Clark was looking good, but unfortunately, the Jayhawks were not. Somehow they had actually regressed from last year. I guess people didn't want to play with Clark Kent. He does have some weapons though that he can definitely work with, so that's good at least. But what is not good is that it turns out that Lois Lane has somehow found out that Clark is Superman. Now Clark doesn't really know how to feel about this, but he has no choice but to trust her heading into his sophomore season, as he is now leading the Kansas Jayhawks on the road into their first game of the year, where they will be taking on the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors. Rainbow Warriors is a crazy name, by the way, but Clark's season is getting started off great. He's coming up with some nice completions to his teammates, and he's even out here using his legs to pick up a first down. But unfortunately, Clark would soon see just how bad his offensive line was this year, and he didn't want to make it too obvious that he had superpowers or nothing, so he took a couple sacks in this drive, bringing us to the second quarter where they are down 7-0, and they're trying to make something happen as Clark throws his ball up, and a receiver makes a nice catch at around the 50-yard line. Eventually, they would move themselves into the red zone, where a pop pass gets him to the outside and into the end zone for a score. The Jayhawks are tying this game up and quickly get the ball back with around 2 minutes left in the half. And even though this offensive line completely breaks down, Clark still finds a man downfield, moving him right back into the red zone with the chance to put up some points, and they're looking good right now. Bringing us to a 1st and 10 where Clark would find a man wide open over the middle for a touchdown, making a nice throw even when his lineman was being pushed back into his face. Hey, wait, hold on, y'all. What's going on? It looks like one of the Hawaii linemen are trying to talk to Clark. Hey, Clark. Hey, Clark, come here. Hey, bro, I know your ass Superman. Ain't you? You Superman. Hey, it's all good though, bro. I ain't gonna tell nobody. But hey, bro, if you ever need a sidekick, just let me know, man. They call me Black Thunder in the streets, boy. You know what I'm saying? Just let me know. I got you. Now, after Hawaii turns the ball over, Kansas would be right back down towards the goal line. And on this 4th down, Clark was moving his way across for a score, helping his team go up 14, and soon they would be up by 3 possessions. And it looks like they would have a chance to add to it as Clark would hit a man deep in opposing territory, bringing the Jayhawks down to the goal line at the end of the 3rd quarter, where on this play Clark would keep it himself and come up with a touchdown that not only puts the Jayhawks up by 4 possessions, but does enough to give them their first W of this season. Kansas would close this one out 31-20 thanks to a great game from Clark Kent. He put up almost 350 yards with 4 touchdowns and really showed that he was ready to get into the rest of the season. Once again, Kansas does not have that great of a schedule, as these are mostly teams that they have beat last year. But this is the new season where Kansas's roster is significantly worse, so we're going to have to see if Clark can carry Kansas on his back this season, starting off with their first home game of the season, where they will be set to match up against FCS Midwest. Now, it turns out that since FCS Midwest was one of, if not the worst team on the Jayhawks schedule, Kansas would have no problem picking this defense apart, as Clark ends up throwing a long touchdown on this opening drive, and it didn't seem like he was going to look back from there. He came out here later on in the 1st quarter and delivered an absolute strike up the seam, hitting a receiver right before he broke off 2 tackles, and just like that, Clark was getting his 2nd touchdown of the day. By the end of the 3rd quarter, the Jayhawks were up 24-0, which is where Clark would roll out left in his play and send a man downfield, hitting him in stride as he crosses over the goal line for his 3rd score of the day, putting up a score that locks in the Jayhawks' 2nd win of the season in dominant fashion, closing this one out 34-7 thanks to an almost 300-yard and 3-touchdown performance from Clark. It's definitely going well for him early on in the season, man. He's getting NIL deals, and he's still taking time to work on his game, but he is also staying focused on trying to pick up a win every week. and he felt like they had a pretty good chance to get one this week against an in-state rival, Kansas State. Now the Jayhawks did start slow in this one, but as soon as the second quarter started, they turned it on immediately. They would put up a score to tie this game up and quickly get the ball back, where Clark made an incredible play, throwing this pass all the way across the field and still somehow coming up with a completion. And eventually he would close out this first half with another completion that ended up going for a touchdown, officially taking the lead heading into the second half, and at this point the Jayhawks had all the momentum. They came out here and scored multiple times in the second half to put them up by 3 possessions, bringing us to the end of this one, where Clark was doing his best to just embarrass this defense. And he was trying to make a play that would pretty much, oh dang. But yeah, he was making a play that was putting an end to this game. The Jayhawks would take this one against an in-state rival in a game where Clark had almost 200 yards passing and almost 100 yards rushing. He was definitely balling out so far this season, but he was also doing it while not putting in any extra work. He didn't have a lot of free time to spend with his teammates because when he wasn't playing football, he was out here trying to save people. But he was doing a great job of trying to balance everything, so he was happy about it. What he was not happy about was that his friend Lex Luthor was transferring from Kansas to Oregon. It was too bad because Lex had always been suspiciously nice to Clark. He had no idea why, but Lex definitely seemed like a nice guy to Clark. Regardless, Superman had to remain locked in going forward throughout his season, and he figured since he was thinking about getting an upgrade on his suit soon, he might as well try and upgrade some of his gear on the field. So he took some time to get things together before heading into his next game, where Clark Kent was leading his team into a matchup against another Big 12 opponent, the 3-1 TCU Horned Frogs. Now this first quarter started off with these two teams going back and forth as Clark takes a hit and delivers a dime that is caught for a touchdown, tying this game up as we now head into the second quarter, where Clark and his offense are trying to get back downfield, and this throw right here does it for him. They come up with a play that would ultimately lead them down towards the goal line, where on this 3rd down and 2, an RPO to the outside gets him across for a score that takes the lead. And the Jayhawks would actually get back down to the goal line before the end of the half, where this time Clark would take it himself for a touchdown that gives them back the lead. His team had no problem moving the ball all day, and it looks like they would have a chance to extend their lead soon before Clark throws a pick. But it didn't turn out to mean much at the moment because Kansas would get the ball back still up by 7, and soon after Clark was making a throw to the outside that springs his receiver open, and out of nowhere he is flying down the sideline for Superman's 4th touchdown of the game. The Kansas Jayhawks have taken a 2-possession lead, and it looks like they might have done enough to put this one away, but this game actually ends up going into overtime, where on this opening possession, Clark was doing a great job using his legs to get downfield before saying hey, and moving his team inside the 5-yard line, setting them up with the chance to put up some points where a couple plays later they did, bringing us to double overtime where they have to come up with some points if they want to stay in this game. But on this play after Clark drops back, he has to slow everything down because something ain't right, man. He thinks he can hear something. He thinks it almost sounds like somebody's about to use a machine gun, so oh yeah, now he gotta go. So before anybody even noticed, Clark had to fly out of Kansas and put a stop to these bullets, man. Superman had to just take these dudes out real quick before he would go ahead and fly right back to the stadium and deliver a straight dime in the end zone for a touchdown. He put up a score that gave his team a chance to take the lead after they tied this game up, and now in triple overtime, all they need is a 2-point conversion to take the lead, and Clark Kent delivers another strike to the end zone. And it turns out that these points were the game-winning score. Kansas would take down TCU in triple overtime, but there's no way they could have done this without Clark, who had 375 passing yards and 6 touchdowns. He had an immaculate game that unfortunately did not get him a lot of attention amongst Heisman voters, but with Kansas sitting at 4-0 and being one of the top-ranked teams in the country, the entire fan base knew that they had potential to really be something special. Kansas came out here in a game against 0-4 Louisiana Tech where Clark Kent was legitimately flying over defenders. He came up with probably one of his coolest touchdowns of the season as he gives his team a 7-point lead, and in a game where Clark was utilizing his legs a lot, he was really showing just how effective of a runner he truly was. He was consistently making plays for his team on the ground while also putting up over 300 yards in this game, bringing us to this 1st and goal where he would find a man in the end zone for his 3rd score of the day, extending Kansas's lead here late in the 4th quarter and doing enough to put them at 5-0 on the season. This Jayhawks team was pretty much steamrolling the competition so far this year, and everything was going great for Clark Kent. He had actually recently made Lois Lane his girlfriend, and he was looking forward to hanging out with her. But she was pretty much the only person he would make time for, man, because his teammates would ask to hang out a lot. But he just really didn't have that much time, man. He was out here saving the city from danger any time that he could. And with whatever remaining time he had left, he was really trying to become a better football player. Just because he got superpowers doesn't mean that he's inherently good. He has to still develop some skills. So Clark came out here absolutely locked in heading into his next home game against Colorado. And one of the things that Clark had actually learned recently is that he could just tell his receivers exactly where to be. So after rolling out right in this play and buying himself some time, he launched this one up, and the receiver would come up with the catch, putting up a touchdown on this opening drive that really set the tone for the team as they would soon be up 2 possessions. And Clark was just having no problems picking apart this defense as he finds a man up the seam who took it the distance for a touchdown to put them up by 3 scores. And by the second half, with Clark already having 5 touchdowns, he would end up throwing his 6th, already doing enough by the end of the third quarter to dominate Colorado 45-21. This team was absolutely on a roll as Clark would earn his first Big 12 Player of the Week so far this season, but now he knows that it's time for him to be as locked in as possible, especially heading into his next game, as Kansas will not only be on the road, but they will be facing off against one of the top-ranked teams in the country. And it would be a battle to see who would be able to keep their undefeated season alive, as Kansas is about to match up against Arizona State. Now, Arizona State out the gate would show that they were not messing around. They sacked Clark Kent and put an end to the opening drive, putting themselves up by 3 points. But with Clark being one of the best quarterbacks in the country at this point, he would not be contained so easily. He came up with a big run that brings his team up to midfield, and soon they would actually be down towards the red zone. We're on this play as Clark rolls out right, he fires his ball towards the end zone, and it ends up being caught at the 1-yard line, bringing us to a 3rd down and goal where Clark was able to dive across for the first touchdown of the game for the Jayhawks. And things were looking good, man. They were able to take the lead, and it seems like they had all the momentum, but then they would come to a play where Clark was in danger of getting sacked. So he decided to just throw the ball away, and it ends up getting flagged for an intentional grounding. Clark makes an atrocious play that brings his team to 3rd down and 44. This dude almost looking like Shador Sanders for a second, but he still comes up with the play, bringing his team back into field goal range, and this one would end up tied up. With 1 minute left and a half, though, this pass protection is just not holding up. So Clark decides to just speed boost out of there and take matters into his own hands, man. He sees a wide open lane, and he's able to take advantage of it as he sprints towards the end zone for a touchdown. He crosses over the goal line to put his team up 7, and now Kansas looks like they have all the momentum. They got right back down towards the goal line in the second half and came up with the score that puts them up by 2 possessions, and even as the 4th quarter rolled around, with this pass protection being absolutely garbage, it didn't really seem to bother Clark as he was finding a way to get up out of there and get himself down the sideline where he would cross over the goal line for another score. He was having an immaculate performance against one of the best teams in the country, and yet this game would still end up going into overtime, where he had no problem using his legs to make a play, especially on this 3rd down. He brought his team down to the goal line where at this point Clark was pretty much doing everything himself. He takes this one again to the outside for a score that puts this one into double overtime. And luckily, it actually wasn't long before Clark would find his running back wide open, coming up with a score that takes the lead for Kansas. And after Clark had finally gotten a good block from one of his Kansas linemen, he couldn't even believe it. So after he scores his 2-point conversion, he has to make sure that he's not dreaming or something. But nah, everything's actually all good. His team is just matching up very well against the number 4 team in the nation, and with Clark on the ground being absolutely unstoppable. It turns out that another 2-point conversion was enough to give Kansas the victory. They beat the number 4 ranked team in the country in another triple overtime game, led by their quarterback Clark Kent, who had 275 yards with over 200 yards rushing, ultimately earning himself his first National Offensive Player of the Week. And despite playing amazing, he still gave a lot of credit to his teammates, because everybody has done enough to help Kansas win so far this season, and with the schedule full of teams that are just hovering around 500, Clark feels like the days of him dominating the Big 12 are only just getting started. Superman came out here in a game against BYU and was frying them up like SpongeBob with some Krabby Patties. He was coming up with some of the most incredible throws that you will ever see, and he had 5 touchdowns by the end of the 3rd quarter, eventually bringing us to the 4th quarter where Clark would take it upon himself to jump over a defender in the end zone. It almost looked like he was flying over this guy as he puts up his 6th touchdown of the night. But in a performance where Clark wanted to break his own record, he extended the play here late in the 4th quarter and told his running back to go up the field, and eventually found him in the end zone for his 7th touchdown of the day, ultimately helping Kansas go on to dominate another game, closing this one out 49-16, but it couldn't have been done without an almost 400-yard and 7-touchdown performance from Clark. Because of him, Kansas was now a top 5 team in the nation, and they were hoping they could keep climbing up the rankings heading into their next game against Baylor, where although this was a game where Clark struggled early on, throwing an interception, as soon as he started to say, hey, the Jayhawks were looking different. In just one play, he had completely flipped the field for his team, and all of a sudden Kansas had all the momentum going forward. Because even though Kansas was down in this game, they had no problem putting up points to come back. They tied it up at 14 before half, bringing us to a 3rd down and 12, where on this play Clark decided to scramble up the middle and say, "Excuse me," absolutely obliterating one dude's ankles before snatching 3 more. Clark Kent had just cooked these dudes up, and just like that, he was taking his team to the end zone for a score that would go on to win them this game, beating Baylor 31-21 thanks to a 200-yard performance on the ground from Clark. Clark was happy about how his season had been going so far this year, but it turns out that there was one person who was not, as it turns out that Lex Luthor was plotting something, and Clark had no idea. But for now, he would come out here in another game against Houston where he was absolutely wrecking them. It seemed like there was pretty much no defense that could stop Clark on the ground. But even if they could, especially when these Kansas receivers were able to create some separation, Clark was still making it happen through the air, as he is connecting with a receiver who takes this one the distance to put Kansas up by 2 possessions, bringing us to the end of the 4th quarter where even when Clark was facing a heavy blitz, he would still deliver dimes, coming up with an incredible throw that puts his team up by 3 possessions at the end of this game and is able to move the Jayhawks to 10-0 on the season. Clark had been taking care of business all year on and off the field, but sometimes he would definitely miss out on his football obligations due to him being Superman. And because of that, he was starting to get in a little trouble with his coaches. But regardless, Clark and the Kansas Jayhawks continued to stay locked in heading into the last 2 games of the season. The Jayhawks came out here against 7-3 Iowa State, where Clark was throwing bombs. He found a receiver in the first half for a 79-yard touchdown. A huge play that set the tone in a relatively low-scoring game, as by the 4th quarter this one is 14-3, where after Clark rolls out to his left, he is trying to find somebody open, but there's nobody, bro, so he's gone. He takes this one upfield before saying, "Hey," snapping his dude's ankles for a score. He moves his team up 3 possessions in the 4th quarter and moves them to 11-0 on the year. It looks like no matter what, Kansas is about to punch their ticket to the college football playoffs. So things are looking real good for Clark at this point until Lois sends him a text and tells him that there's an island full of some stuff called kryptonite, and apparently it's made from the same stuff that he drank last year in the playoffs. So yeah, Clark definitely got to see what's up, but it turns out that the kryptonite makes Superman weaker. So you know what, he decided that he's gonna take this whole island and get out of here, boy, throw that shit into space. And Clark was so weak from that for a second that he even fell back down to Earth. It was all good though by the time the sun came up and Clark was ready to head into his next game of the year, which happened to be the final game of the regular season, where they would be on the road facing off against West Virginia. And with the Mountaineers having a losing record and not really being super competitive this season, that didn't really change too much heading into this game, because Clark and his team had the lead all throughout this first half, and even on plays where West Virginia had Clark for a sack, he would super speed boost out of there and still find a way to rip this ball towards the end zone for a score. He's putting Kansas up by 14 with an incredible play. Bringing us to the second half, we're still up by 14. Kansas has all the momentum, and after Clark fires this one downfield on the post for a touchdown, Kansas would now have a 21-point lead, along with their 12th win on the season. They close out the regular season undefeated as the number 2 team in the nation. With Clark Kent leading the team, they had been dominant all throughout the year, pulling out wins left and right in what is already considered to be the greatest season in the history of Kansas. Even better than their last season already. But they now have a chance to make it even better, as they are getting set to head into the Big 12 Championship, where they will have to find a way to come up with a win against the team that they had already seen before, the now number 13th ranked team in the country, Arizona State. Now in the Big 12 Championship, this one was stalemated early on as it was 0-0 all throughout the first half, at least until Kansas would finally make a play to get them inside the 5-yard line, bringing us to a third down where Clark had time to toss it across the middle for a score. He put up the first points of the game and gave Kansas a ton of momentum in this first half, because they would get to a play where Arizona State was trying to send a blitz, but all that did was just force Clark out of the pocket where he had a ton of room. He picked up a few yards before saying hey and breaking off a tackle, and out of nowhere Clark Kent was gone. He was taking this one up the sideline for an 80-yard touchdown. A huge play in the biggest game of the season so far, and he almost couldn't believe that he was really doing this at the highest level. But he would definitely begin to believe it on the following drive as he went out there and threw a pick, his third one of the season that allowed Arizona State to get back into this game. But by the third quarter, Clark was once again rolling out right and putting up another score that got his team up by 2 possessions. But in a game where Arizona State was trying to keep this one close, Clark Kent knew that he had to make something happen that would put this one away. So after rolling out right in this play, he once again has a ton of room. So he decides to say, hey, skip-a-doo-bop, break off some tackles, and throw this dude to the sideline. Oh, nah! Superman almost sent that dude up to the nosebleeds. He was making a miraculous play that resulted in a 75-yard touchdown. Hey, now I'm not gonna lie, bro, this is probably one of the best plays that I've ever seen anybody ever make. Superman was really that good, and it seems like there was actually one person in particular who noticed that he was a little too good. Either way, the Kansas Jayhawks were now officially Big 12 champions, closing this one out 28-21 to make them back-to-back conference champions. And they couldn't have done it without a game from Clark where he rushed for over 300 yards. An absolute dominant performance that resulted in him breaking the single-season record for most rushing touchdowns at Kansas. Clark Kent had officially made a huge name for himself in the college football world. But he was not only making a name for himself, as his offensive coordinator would go on to win Coordinator of the Year. And to be fair, there wasn't really much he had to do when he had Superman on his team, but that's all good, bruh. Because Superman was earning some awards too, as he not only earns the Walter Camp and the Maxwell, but he also becomes the first player in the history of Kansas to win a Heisman Trophy. He had a spectacular year, and Clark was being recognized for it as he is deemed the #1 player in the nation. And to be honest, this wasn't even surprising for Clark because he knew that he could actually be a lot better. And eventually there would come a time where his team might actually need him to be. Because now it is time for the college football playoffs, where at this point Kansas had a chance to win one of the biggest bowl games in their program's history, while also getting themselves to the next round. But the only way that they would be able to do that is if they can find a way to take down the LSU Tigers. Now early on in this game, this Kansas offense seemed to be completely locked in. Clark threw a touchdown here to close out the first quarter, leading to a tie ball game, where despite the fact that LSU's pass rush was trying to bring down Clark, they could not get it done. Because he would get the ball out to a receiver where it turns out LSU couldn't even bring him down. This receiver breaks off a tackle and takes this one the distance for a touchdown. He gives Kansas another lead in this one, and it turns out that they would never look back. Because by the end of the third quarter, they were up by 2 possessions, and after Clark throws his 3rd score of the day, the Jayhawks had done enough to get to the next round of the playoffs. They win the Orange Bowl and take down one of the top teams in the nation, and at this point it was clear that Kansas was a real serious team after taking down an SEC opponent. But the country was about to see just how serious Kansas really was, because their next opponent was not only going to be another SEC team, but they would also be the #2 squad in the nation. So with the chance for Kansas to punch their ticket to the national championship, they would have to find a way to take down the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now on this opening drive, things were definitely looking rough for Kansas because despite the fact that Clark was doing a great job extending this play, they would still end up getting stopped on 3rd down. But it did not turn out to be a big deal for Kansas as they would get the ball back still tied at 0, and Kansas would begin moving themselves down into scoring range, bringing us to a 2nd down and goal where Clark dumped it off to the flat and came up with the first score of the game, putting the Jayhawks up by 7 over Alabama. But as the Crimson Tide would tie this game up in the second half, Clark knew he had to start coming up with some big plays, and he was definitely making one right here. This man Clark was looking like he could go, oh dang. Oh yeah, he smacked the shit out of Clark, but it did not stop Kansas from getting downfield, bringing us to a 1st and goal where Clark tossed it over the middle for a touchdown. He puts up some points that gives the Jayhawks the lead back, and now they are in great position as they head to the 4th quarter, still up by 7. Bringing us to a play where Clark would find his running back down the sideline in the whole shot of the cover 2. He delivered a dime that got his team back in the scoring range with just a few minutes left in this game. And a couple plays later on a 2nd down and 8, Clark would once again find a man open over the middle who got the team across the goal line for a touchdown that not only put them up by 2 possessions, but did enough to send them to their first ever national championship. The Kansas Jayhawks had taken down back-to-back SEC opponents thanks to a 3-touchdown performance from their quarterback, as Clark Kent was leading this team to places that this program had never been before. And now Kansas could not wait for a chance to compete for a national championship. But there was somebody who was preparing to stop them from competing altogether, as Lex Luthor had just thought of a way to not only stop Clark Kent in football, but potentially put an end to Superman for good. So we're gonna have to see what Lex Luthor does as we are now heading into the national championship, where Clark Kent was leading his team out onto the field for a chance to become the #1 team in the nation. This program had a chance to do something that they had never done before, but the only way that they will be able to get it done is if they can somehow find a way to come up with a win against Lex Luthor's Oregon Ducks. Now, it did not take long into this game for Clark to start feeling a little different, man. There was something going on. He just was not feeling very well, and his team ended up getting stopped on their opening drive. It wouldn't be until the next drive, though, where Clark would find a man open, and he would get the ball out to him, but this hit actually hurt. Clark was starting to feel these hits from Oregon like he had never felt before. Luckily, that didn't stop him from coming out here the very next play and throwing a dime to the end zone for a touchdown, putting up the first points of the game here in this national championship. And it looked like they had set the tone for Kansas as they got the ball back still up by 7. And at this point, Clark was not feeling well, but he had to hang in there. He continued to come up with throws that helped his team get back into field goal range. But with Oregon continuing to send the blitz, Clark did a great job of reading the defense, coming up with another touchdown on the day. He had Kansas up by 2 possessions in the first half. And it would actually be at the end of the half where Clark would finally realize why he was not feeling well. He had to remember what it felt like throwing that entire island of kryptonite into space, and for some reason playing in this game felt extremely similar. And he was wondering why until he got tackled again and realized that the Oregon jerseys have kryptonite in them. Somebody from Oregon knew that Clark was Superman and got Oregon to wear kryptonite uniforms just to put a stop to Clark Kent. And unfortunately in the second half, it looked like it was beginning to work, bringing us to a 3rd down and 10 where this offensive line was giving him no time, but Clark still got the ball out and came up with the completion for a 1st down. He came up with a big throw for his team that ended up pushing them back towards their goal line, bringing us to a 1st down and goal where even though Clark was affected by the kryptonite, he was still able to get around the edge and up the sideline for a touchdown. Clark Kent was making an amazing play that puts his team up by 3 possessions in the second half. Despite him not feeling well, man, they have complete control in this one, now bringing us to the 4th quarter, where Clark and his offense continued to dime up this Ducks defense, coming up with a play that moves them back into scoring range with less than 3 minutes left to go. And despite the fact that somebody was trying to poison Clark with kryptonite, he would still make enough plays for his team to give them all the momentum, and for the first time in the program's history, led by Clark Kent, the Kansas Jayhawks were officially national champions. They had taken down the #1 team in the nation, ruining Oregon's perfect season and completing their own as they end up 16-0. They had dominated all throughout the season thanks to their quarterback Clark Kent, and because of him, the Jayhawks were now on top of the college football world. Now, interestingly enough, the first person to text Clark after the game was Lex Luthor. He congratulated him on the championship, but something seems off. Clark is starting to put it together that maybe Lex knows that he is Superman. And I mean, he doesn't know how Lex would have found out, but it definitely does not make sense that he goes to Oregon and all of a sudden they now have kryptonite uniforms? Hell nah, man, something going on with this and Clark knows it. For now, he's not really trying to worry about that though, as he has just won a national championship, and he is making sure to give credits to his teammates because that is the kind of guy that Superman is. Now, Clark was not a top 5 passer in the nation, but he was top 10. Finishing the season with over 4,000 yards passing, 45 touchdowns, 67% completion percentage to only 3 interceptions. But on top of that, Clark was also the 5th leading rusher in the country, putting up almost 1,500 yards in 19 touchdowns. Meaning for his season totals, he put up over 5,500 yards, 64 touchdowns, and only 3 turnovers. He had one of, if not the greatest season in the history of college football. And he went on to break 4 single-season records for Kansas while he was at it, as he was now the single-season leader in passing and rushing yards and passing and rushing touchdowns. And in just one season, Clark's trophy room is damn near all the way filled up. Clark knows that he had absolutely dominated college football over the past 2 seasons. And although he does enjoy playing with the Jayhawks, he also feels like he might be in for a change of scenery. So after winning a championship, he's definitely thinking about entering the transfer portal, where he could team up with an incoming freshman Peter Parker, who at this point is ranked one of the top receivers in the nation. Or he could potentially take his talents to the NFL, where he could potentially compete at the highest level and have a little bit more freedom to be Superman. So going into the offseason, Clark definitely had a big decision to make, but I'll leave that decision up to you guys. If you want to see a part 3 of Clark Kent, be sure to get this video to 1,000 likes and subscribe to the channel down below. Also be sure to comment down below who else you guys want to see next, and YouTube thinks you'll like one of these other stories until the next one comes out. If you got to this point, just know that I appreciate you more than you'll ever know, and other than that, I'm gonna catch you guys next time.